When your government is mired in scandal and yet another cabinet minister is forced to resign from your government, well, what would you do? Well, if you're Justin Trudeau, you announce a GST holiday. Hello, I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Lorrie, Goldstein, and Warren Kinsella. Lorrie, we've seen crass political moves before. We've seen every level of government, every stripe of politician bribing us with our own money. We've seen that happen before. But the Trudeau Liberals have now, and in partnership with their buddies, the NDP, are going to announce a GST holiday on a number of goods for the next 2 months: children's clothing, prepared meals, some alcohol. So the GST won't be charged. It's all about savings. It's all about putting money back into people's pockets. But when you look at where we stand today on inflation, does this even make a difference?
Well, look, first of all, okay, that's nice. I'm glad that families will be getting, with children, will be getting a break and prepared meals at grocery stores. But what isn't included and what the NDP wanted and which would actually help would be to remove the GST for at least over the winter from home heating bills.
Right.
I mean, that would help. It would also help if they would stop putting the imposing the GST on top of the carbon tax. That's going to raise more than 400 million for the government this year, more than a billion by 2030. And it's what means that the carbon tax is not, as the Liberals claim, revenue neutral. It's not, because they don't return the GST imposed on the carbon tax. Having said that, look, this is something that governments are doing. Ontario's sending out $200 checks to everybody, possibly preparing for an early election. Look, this is a government in trouble, and it's trying to do things that it thinks will be popular. But to me, it lacks understanding of the fact that it's not just families with children who are facing hard times. It's not just people who buy prepared meals from grocery stores. Everybody's feeling hard at times. And the government has been inconsistent in how it proposes to help people. For example, apparently nothing about an exemption from home heating bills, except for certain people, particularly in Atlantic Canada, who now that they're not the only ones who heat with oil, but it's in other parts of the country as well, and they're getting a break. Okay, so if you're in Atlantic Canada and you have home heating, or you're anywhere else and you heat with oil, you're getting a break, right? For an extended break. But if you heat with natural gas, you don't. And Canadians don't have a choice about the kind of heat they purchase for their homes. And so, one of the whole ideas of the carbon tax was that Canadians would be able to choose lower carbon alternatives. But the lower carbon alternatives aren't there. And so to me, it's a government scrambling. Not going to criticize them for giving people a minor tax break, but that's all it is. And it's not going to affect the bottom line for people struggling to pay the rent and put food on the table for their kids.
And I think that's such an important point that Lorrie raises, Warren, is that we're not here criticizing government for giving us a bit of a tax break. It's great when we get a little bit of our own money back when we're so heavily taxed already. But I think what the Liberals are missing in all of this is they say this is for 2 months. Yes, Christmas season is coming, is upon us, and they're going to give breaks on children's clothing, children's shoes, toys. That could have somewhat of an impact. But more broadly, it's not on the things that are going to help us day to day in terms of the home heating costs, for example. But 2 months, memories are short. What's the gain here for the Liberals on this?
Well, there's not much of a gain, in my opinion, because they've got to deal with this green fund scandal. They're supposed to be disclosing documents to Parliament. Parliament's been paralyzed for 2 months, so they can't do any of this without dealing with that, right? Because what they're announcing, Freeland and Trudeau, requires legislative change. But I'm going to reveal here how old I am. Back when I worked for Chrétien, we we dealt with this. You know, we had a Liberal caucus that Chrétien inherited, and they were all of them, Paul Martin and Sheila Copps, let's scrap the GST, Jean. And Jean would say to them, well, I'm thinking that Brian Mulroney's done this because the Treasury needs the revenue. So, and then the debate became the one the two of you have just been talking about, is exceptions. And I am no tax lawyer, but I can tell you, as soon as you create exceptions in any taxation policy, well, it fire up an army of lobbyists to seek exceptions for their clients, right? Because if you do it for natural gas, then you're going to hear from the oil people, you're going to hear about it from solar and wind, you're going to hear about it from everybody. Say, well, what about us? And then it won't be 2 months anymore either. They're going to say, well, can we extend this for 3 months? You know, here's our spreadsheet showing that we're in trouble. Soon as you start creating exceptions to taxation policy, you open the door to a massive lobby effort to expand it. So, you know, and the other problem that they've got, and well, maybe it's not a problem for Trudeau, all of the premiers, the next phone call that the reporters at the press conference are making right now is to the premier's offices saying, okay, are you going to match what the feds are doing?
That's right.
And that's going to make for some very grumpy premiers that Trudeau has put them in this box. It's like, hey, pal, you're in big political trouble. We're not. You've now moved some of your trouble onto our doorstep and created this demand that we also lower our component of the HST, because the tax, right? There's the federal component and the provincial component. Now there's going to be demands not just for exceptions, but the province to match it. So like we're heading, this is going to be a schmozzle, as they say in Yiddish.
Yeah.
Like this is a full-on schmozzle we're heading into. I think it's bad tax policy.
Well, Lorrie, Warren has just laid out an eye-watering amount of problems with this, which says to me, as I mentioned at the top, this is a Trudeau government mired in scandal. They've become irrelevant. They're well past their due date. Canadians are desperate for an election. They're but 20 points behind in the polls. It seems to me that this is one of those back of the napkin type of policies that may have been they came up with and not necessarily well thought through. And in the meantime, while that is going on, the NDP is running around taking all the credit for this. So maybe that does speak to the sort of half-baked nature of this policy.
Well, look, just a few days ago at the G20, Trudeau was at a global citizen conference, and he talked there about why it's like that in the next election that he's running, he is going to convince Canadians that despite the fact it's hard for them to pay the rent and put food on the table, they have a moral obligation to save the planet through his carbon tax. It would be hard to think of anything more tone deaf than that. He also misleads people about, he says, well, carbon tax is the most efficient way to do it as opposed to regulations and subsidies. No, Prime Minister, you have 147 government programs that are part of this. You've put aside $200 billion of taxpayers' money to pay for it. It's not just the carbon tax. But to me, all of this other stuff to me is sort of meant to detract from and minimize what Per Poilievre says will be the next election, will be about the carbon tax. But to me, it's not just about the carbon tax. It's about a government that thinks that it can solve every problem by throwing more money at it. And the problem becomes when it throws more money at it, it doesn't follow up on whether things are getting better. There was a report this week from the Fraser Institute. The government has tripled funding on Indigenous affairs to $32 billion in next year from $11 billion in 2015, right? I think we all want Indigenous people to have a better outcomes in life, but what have we gotten for that tripling all that money? Tripling from 11 billion a year to 32 billion a year. Are the lives of people on reserves substantially better? They have improved water quality on some. They said they were going to do that by March 21. They've done it for a lot of reserves, but they haven't for a lot of reserves. And so it's also the issue of value for money. And so to me, these things that he's talking about today, they're trinkets. They're little shiny baubles here, we're going to bribe you with a little of your money, right? We're going to give you back a little of your money, not enough money for you to make a material difference in your life year after year, but a little. And also, like, really, they want to remind people of the GST and the fact that it's on that it's imposed on top of the carbon tax on gasoline, on natural gas, home heating,
That's right.
on most goods and services. You want to raise all that, fill your boots.
Last word to you on this, Warren. Okay, when we gather again in 2.5 months time, when this is all said and done, this GST holiday is over, people are back to paying their high bills, the carbon tax is going to go up again on April 1st. Does this move the needle at all for the Liberals? Are Canadians going to say, oh, thank you so very much?
Yeah, you put your finger on the problem with it. It comes to an end, and it would be coming to an end shortly before the next federal election is required to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I've been around for a long time. I've seen these things work. Sometimes they do. You've got Doug Ford dollars in Ontario, and he's got a substantial lead on his opponents. So it's worked in Ontario. I remember when in Alberta, when I was going to law school, and Ralph Klein did this, and it blew up in his face. People thought it was, as Lorrie just said, buying their support with their own money. So it really depends. I think at the end of the day, however, this is not likely to work because it is going to be messy. People are going to say, okay, well, if I'm not paying for children's clothing, what about my teenagers or what have you? There are going to be demands for other exceptions. So I think that's going to be the debate we're going to be hearing for the next 2 months, regrettably.
Well, there you go, Canada. You are getting a GST holiday on some items, courtesy of the Liberal and with the help of the NDP. Well, let us know what you think in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And go to the TorontoSun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.